Hey, deep divers. So, you want to really get what's going on with this whole Harvey Weinstein situation? Well, buckle up because this case has taken some wild turns.
It really has been something, hasn't it? I mean, from his downfall and the whole hashtag #MeToo movement exploding to, well, some pretty big legal fights.
It's kind of hard to keep track of it all. And remember back in 2020 when that New York conviction came down, like that felt huge. Did it feel like a turning point to you? Like finally?
It did. That conviction, a lot of people felt that, right? This was it.
Yeah.
But, well, it didn't exactly stick, did it?
Yeah, no kidding. Last year, the highest court in New York, the State Court of Appeals, they completely overturned it.
They did.
So what was the deal there?
Well, so the court basically said the judge in the trial went too far.
Okay.
By letting accusers who weren't part of those specific charges against Weinstein testify. They said, it might look bad, sure, but it wasn't actually about what they were looking at in that trial.
Right.
And it might have, made the jury biased.
So even if those accusations were out there, they couldn't be considered for that specific case.
Exactly. And the New York State Court of Appeals, they were super clear about it. They said, and I quote, "Under our system of justice, the accused has a right to be held to account only for the crime charged."
Right.
So, you can't just say someone's guilty because of accusations or patterns or whatever from other situations.
Right. Everyone deserves a fair trial, but that feels tricky. You know what I mean? If there's a history of bad behavior or whatever, shouldn't that be part of understanding what happened in a particular case?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And it gets to this whole thing called the Molyneux rule, which is basically when you're allowed to use past stuff as evidence. It's complicated, but basically it's really limited.
So it's not as easy as saying, well, he was accused of something similar before, so he must be guilty now.
Nope. Each accusation is looked at by itself with the evidence from that specific situation. So you can't just convict someone based on their past or what people think they did. It has to be about the evidence in this case.
Okay, so that Molyneux rule, does that only apply to, big cases like Weinstein's, or is this for everyone?
Oh, no, it's for everyone. We're talking about it with this case, but it's like a fundamental thing about how the American legal system works. Like, imagine someone did something minor years ago, and now they're in court for something new. That rule helps make sure they're treated fairly and not just assumed guilty because of their past.
Okay, so we're talking about fair trials, but what happens to those other accusations against Weinstein? He didn't just walk away after the New York thing fell apart, did he?
No, not at all.
Right.
And this is where it gets even more complicated. See, at the same time, all this was happening in New York, he was also facing those charges in Los Angeles.
Oh, right.
Which he was actually convicted of in 2022, rape charges. He's actually in prison right now doing 16 years for that.
Wow. So it was like two totally separate things going on at the same time.
Exactly.
And on top of that, while he's appealing that LA conviction, New York hits him with even more charges. It's like whiplash.
Yeah, September 2024, new charges, sex crimes, accusations from multiple women, some going back to 2005, 2006. Wild, right?
Seriously. So with all this going on, old charges, new charges, how do the courts even know where to start? What evidence can they use? It seems like a mess.
You're telling me. And you know what? That's exactly what Weinstein's lawyers argued. They fought tooth and nail to keep those new charges totally separate from that whole New York retrial. They said it wasn't fair, that it would prejudice the jury.
I mean, yeah, each set of charges should be on its own, right?
Exactly. You can't just lump everything together. But then there's the question of, okay, if Weinstein himself decides to testify, what's fair game for the prosecution to bring up,
Right.
And that's where this thing called the Sandoval rule comes in. It's all about what evidence they can use if he takes the stand, like during cross-examination. It gets tricky because they have to balance the prosecution's right to be like, is this guy credible with the defendant's right to a fair trial?
Right. So you can't just throw in random accusations to make him look bad.
Exactly. It's a tightrope walk, for sure.
So much to consider.
There is. Because remember, this isn't just some law school hypothetical. These are real people's lives we're talking about. Right. What they're going through, the impact of all of this, it's heavy stuff.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the legal stuff and forget that. Speaking of which, didn't we want to talk about that Vox article? That public defender had some pretty strong opinions on how the judge handled that first New York trial.
Oh, yeah. Especially that part where they straight up says the judge was, and I quote, behaving like a prosecutor.
Yeah, that's a pretty serious thing to say about a judge.
It is. Their job is to be neutral.
Right.
Make sure everything's fair, not act like they're on one side or the other. And that's even more important in a case like this, where, let's be real, everyone's got an opinion.
Totally. Which brings us back to that whole court of public opinion versus court of law thing, right? Like, it's easy to get caught up in all the accusations, how many people are saying something happened.
Right.
But the legal system, it can't work that way.
They can't.
It has to look at the specific charges, the evidence for those charges, make sure everything's done by the book, even if, I don't know, even if it feels frustrating sometimes.
It's a tough balance. You have to take these accusations seriously, especially with sexual assault. We know how often people aren't believed, how hard it is to come forward. But at the same time, you have to protect everyone's rights. Make sure you're not just assuming guilt because of accusations.
So where does that leave Weinstein now? It's 2024, that New York conviction's gone, he's locked up in California for something else, and there are these new charges waiting in New York. It's a lot.
It really is. Right now, he's appealing that L.A. conviction. And those New York charges, well, we'll have to see. They could go to trial again. But with everything we've talked about, overlapping evidence, all that, I mean, who knows what the courts are going to do?
It's got to be so tough for the accusers going through all this, the uncertainty, and just reliving everything.
I can't imagine. Whatever happens with the legal stuff, you got to admire their bravery for coming forward. I mean, they changed the conversation, you know, even if getting justice is messy and complicated.
This whole case, it really makes you think, does the system work? How do we deal with cases like this? Make sure things are fair, but also make sure there's accountability.
Big questions, right. And it's not just about Weinstein. It's bigger than that. It's about how we deal with sexual assault as a society, how we support survivors, how we make sure the legal system works.
It really is. Well, deep divers, that's where things stand with the Harvey Weinstein case. Like we said, it's complicated. And it's probably not over yet. We'll keep you updated. Thanks for diving into this with us. We'll catch you next time.